Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. So many possibilities, so many amazing things you are working on. What we're going to have now is we're going to have an amazing panel with amazing participants. And I would like to call each and every one of them to the stage. So the panel is going to be led by the Israel Innovation Authority, AI R&D in various national programs, a worldview. And the first guest I want to call to the stage is Dr. Aviv Zeevi. He is a VP in the Technological Infrastructure Division at the Israel Innovation Authority. You can take your seat now. The second guest, oh, you came from this side and you surprised me. Okay, perfect. The second guest would be Dr. Ami Appelbaum, the chairman of the Israel Innovation Authority and chief scientist at the Ministry of Economy and Industry. He will just come in a second. And the next guest would be Irena Ostrich, is Director General of the Communication Networks, Content and Technology at the European Commission. Okay, perfect. Welcome to the stage. Welcome to the stage as well. We have two more guests. Kai Fong Chang is Managing Director of the Singapore Economic Development Board. Welcome. And the last, but definitely not least, Bertrand Brauswing, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this name correctly, is an engineer and coordinator at ENSIE, the research department of France's AI strategy. Please take the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please have a wonderful panel.
Doesn't work. Now it does. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ami Appelbaum, the chairman of Israel Innovation Authority and chief scientist of Ministry of Economy and Industry. I would like to take this opportunity and to thank Tel Aviv University for setting this up, for Intel Corporation, for coming with the idea and driving all of that together with Tel Aviv University and the Israel Innovation Authority. The way that I would like to look at what we have been discussing about artificial intelligence, it's slightly different from what you heard so far. Because in my mind, what we're experiencing now, what we're seeing now, is a big revolution on everything that humankind is doing from cradle to grave. Every element of our life is changing, as you already saw, and it will change furthermore as technology is going to continue to evolve. What is being built today, it's a different infrastructure that it's taking advantage on the data that is around us and being accumulated more and more, on the computing power, and on the implementation of all of that. And that is going to redefine as a new platform and a new way of living for all of us. And no one should get scared that computers will take over human being. It's all about us. Whatever power will give computer, that's the power it will have. And that balance, it's something that we, as a society, and the global society, will have to build and set up that, as was said earlier today, the balance of making it working for us, but not working against us. In order to do that, what we need, any society that want to stay up in the race of having a good economy, a good education, high standard of living, we need to start from education. We need to look into what type of education we give in elementary school, in high school, of course, academia. Then we need to look on transition from academia to the industry. So that's a second element. If we do only teaching and startup, there will not be impact on Israel society or on the world society. So the next step that we all need to look is how to do the implementation in a way that we can leverage very, very quickly basic research into applied research, into product that make impact on the economy. And that challenge that it's become element that we need to drive faster and faster in this forward technology. Even that it's not enough, because if we do it in our small bubble here in Israel, then how are we going to communicate with England, with China, with the US, with our immediate neighbor? We need to look how to do it globally. And that's what this panel is all about. We would like to take this platform of AI, to take this platform of huge amount of data and computing power and decision making, and make it in such that it can grow globally across different continents, different society, different way of business, that it's all drive. And to do that, we need to pull in global envelope, and we need to put the government of the different countries, and that's the purpose of this panel. So Aviv Dr. Aviv will lead this panel, and I would like to thank you everyone for coming, and I would like to wish you all a great day in the conference.
Thank you very much, Ami. Well, it seems like it's already happening. The Israeli industry is one of the leaders in the AI domain, and we're all asking ourselves, is the government needed? What can we do about it? And maybe we should ask our colleagues. So we have here 3 distinguished colleagues we have collected with the aim to learn from them. So I will give each one of them in a minute, 10 minutes to discuss about their AI strategy. But before this, I want to show you already what we are doing in the Israel Innovation Authority, because we are really waiting for this new AI strategy, but we cannot wait, as I said, and we are doing some of our stuff, but I still not sure how do I click for the next slide, sorry. I will try. Okay, so the current status of the Israeli industry is quite good. I think that we are one of the world's leaders. I would say we have more than 1,200 companies in Israel. Depends who you're asking. If you're asking IVC or you're asking the Startup Central. And there's still a few problems. It seems like we are lacking databases. We don't have access to the national database. I think Aviatar Matania already said it in the morning. And we have a problem of computing facility. We have a problem that we are completely dependent on for region infrastructure outside of Israel, and we don't have enough qualified workforce. And I was talking to my colleagues, and it seems it's not really only our problem. But for sure, those are the areas in which we really need to focus on. So if we are looking also on regulation, we still understand that the government is needed. It's needed because if we have enough medical data in the HMOs in Israel, but those data is not available for the Israeli industry, it's a problem. That's why the Israel Innovation Authority has established the pilots program. And we completely understand that if we are not able to talk with the different players, we are not able to get to a result. That's why we are part of the World Economic Forum, and the Israel Innovation Authority represent the World Economic Forum here in Israel. And we completely understand that the government is too slow accepting the technology. And there are so many lawyers out there that are trying to find a solution, and we are trying to work with them step by step. And we need to follow standardization, which already exists around the world. As we said, we are a small country. We are not able to create the standards. We need to adopt the standards that already exist in the world. And that's one of the reasons, that's why we are looking at regulation, one of the problems that we really need to face. So what we are doing exactly in the Israel Innovation Authority, we are doing everything. We are doing everything that can help the Israeli industry. This is our mandate. And we are there to find the exact things that's where we can help. So we can start with the infrastructure itself. We understand that there is about to be announced. Also, we hope with the new government, the Israeli National Quantum program, but it's still was not published, and we are still working on this. But we hope to have some abilities in quantum computing. Following the report by Dr. Orna Berry. We hope to establish a public sector laboratory in which all the ministries will give access to their databases, and we are on our way to build an HPC cloud storage altogether infrastructure. Also, we are joining forces right now with all the different leaders in Israel, also working, of course, with the industry itself, with Intel, with Mellanox, and with NVIDIA. We are working on creating data, so it's not enough only to give access to the databases, but also creating specific data. So in different fields, we have established huge consortium using the Magnet program in the Israel Innovation Authority, and we are building now database on autonomous cars, on agriculture, on food, on climate even, on genomic data. Each one of them is around 60-70 million shekels for 3 years, and we are already on our way to build this data that will be stored in this infrastructure. We are also creating tools. So we have already seen, Ben will show us that there are so many tools around the world, and of course we are not going to compete against Google or Uber or any other tools already exist, but there are still a few tools where we are able to help those exact niche where we think that Israel has an advantage. One of them is, for instance, Hebrew. So there is so much data, unstructured data in Hebrew, that we need the right tools to analyze them. The other option, of course, is robotics. So robotics is developed all over the world, but there are still enough niches in which, like wiring abilities for robotics, that we think that we can create the ability here in Israel. And of course, we are creating projects. So we are completely bottom-up. We are creating pilots. We are listening to the industry, and we are getting ideas from them. Which project do we want? They want to develop? I'm not talking about applications that are using AI abilities, but also the ones who are really creating the generic tools. So that was just a few words about what we are doing in the Israel Innovation Authority, but we are here to hear what is done around the world. And I would like to ask the first speaker, Kai Fong. He is the general manager of the Economic Board Forum in Singapore, and a very good friend of Israel. I think this is his 5th or 6th time in Israel already. And we are working with this agency for a long time, this investment agency in Singapore for a long time. And we have many joint projects, Israeli and Singapore companies. And Singapore is only half of that, I think, with the number of population, but doing so much we can learn from. Thank you, Chaim.
Thank you. Thank you, Aviv. Can I just have a show of hands? How many of you have been to Singapore before or know Singapore? Okay, that's great. I'm basically here to see what we can do more together between Singapore and Israel. We are two very similar countries. I just heard the presentation on the national AI strategy. I must say it sounds very similar, except that you probably have a lot more AI scientists than we do. But I wanted to start off by talking about the opportunities there are in Singapore as well to partner with you and in the region that Singapore is at. Because when I talk to a lot of Israel startups and venture capitalists, they often look to the West, right? So they look to the US, they look to Silicon Valley. But let me just try to attract you to look east towards our region. It's especially in Southeast Asia, it's a booming town 660 million people, and the middle class is probably going to be the fastest rising in the world. And that's really a treasure trove of data and of opportunities for startups who are looking at AI, simply because you have you have a middle class. Take, for example, just coffee, right? You have people who used to spend just 50 cents on coffee, now they're spending $3 on lattes, cappuccinos delivered to their doorstep. You have, people started with Uber, but here you have Grab, Gojek, who are not just doing ride-hailing, who are doing food delivery, who are doing payments. So actually, everything is actually being co-mingled together in a huge data lake and a huge data warehouse. Lots of opportunities there to unearth new insights. And I think fintech and healthcare are going to take center stage in this. Now, so related to that, I'm also very glad to see that already we do have some Israeli startups that have actually built successful businesses out of Singapore. So I don't know whether you've heard of the company Trax. Trax is founded actually by two Israelis. It's retail using AI for image recognition to help retailers, FMCG companies. They're headquartered in Singapore as well. So I'm just going to briefly walk you through our national AI strategy. It is actually, plans are, everyone can come up with plans, right? So there's no real secret. The real difference maker is execution. So this is our commitment in Singapore to say we're trying to execute on these plans, and we're going to work with businesses, startups, academic research to make this happen in Singapore. Okay? So maybe let me start off with this slide just very quickly, just to say, just as your earlier presentation talked about what's so different about Israel, we have to think what's so different, right? We cannot beat China in terms of the amount of raw data they have. That's why they are amongst the top in image recognition. Neither can we beat big countries like US, and really where all the innovation happens in terms of new models. We talked about reinforcement learning earlier. But I think what differentiates Singapore is that we are a small country, so it's easy to deploy technology, single layer, less bureaucracy. We are able to attract our fair share of talent from all over the world. Because we are a small country, data is quite important, and we can bring that in different, we can bring public data as well as public data. And I think in some of these areas, like healthcare, that's where it's critical. And then finally, I talked about ASEAN and Southeast Asia. There's a thriving ecosystem there, and you can launch into the world. So this is just an overview. I'll walk you through very briefly, but essentially, we are starting small by identifying 5 areas in which government is going to pour in resources, work with private companies to execute on just an initial stage of 5 projects. There will be way more coming, but we thought start with 5 first that we are quite confident we will execute on, and then we build the ecosystems enablers. Look, notice we use the same language as you, so actually we are quite similar in many aspects. So let me just walk you through quickly. One of the things that's very important to Singapore is our ports. So what we are doing is to work with the port operators as well as logistics operators to try to use AI to optimize port workflows, to optimize how you stack containers, to optimize trucking. So that's just one area. All these slides will be available to you, so I'll just walk them through quickly. 2, we are looking at smart cities. We think in Singapore we have a big advantage in running small cities, simply because it's a very small, compact place. Lots of people live in dense urban environments. In Singapore, 85% of our people live in public housing. So we can employ sensors, AI. In fact, every lamp post in Singapore is going to be equipped with sensors. And that's going to help us determine traffic flows, pedestrian flows. That's going to help us determine what facilities are being used. And then we can use AI to optimize buildings, energy usage, that's waste disposal, all that. Third one, in Singapore, again, we have a public healthcare system that is very strong, that has data. And so one of the things we are looking at is how do we harness healthcare data? There are some sensitivity there in terms of privacy and all that, but at the same time, patients want to know and want to have the best care. So there are a couple of programs going on. One of the things we are starting is really how do we manage diabetes holistically? So we have to move away from healthcare to health, and part of it is not just using AI to screen. So for example, if you look at your retina, you are able to already determine whether you have diabetes just from retinography. But actually beyond that, we are working with your Fitbits and other providers in terms of digital wearables, because if you can actually track just your heart rate variability, you already today, the technology allows you to determine to some extent whether you have type 2 diabetes in that sense. And you can then use machine learning to behaviorally phenotype. So in other words, you can figure out what sort of nudges work with what sort of people, and then start to nudge people towards living more healthy lifestyles. And then finally, I saw that Aviv was also talking about genomics. That's another big program that we have in terms of getting a sizable amount of people to go through whole genome sequencing, where we can then integrate that into clinical pathways and treat diseases like breast cancer, BRCA1, BRCA2, treat hypercholesterol. Education is a big thing in Singapore, and so we want to take advantage of our strengths, and because most students go through our public education system, we want to use AI to help in adaptive learning as well as in relieving the teachers of the burden. We don't think AI can completely replace humans in teaching, but it can go a long way in maximizing and optimizing learning. I was just talking to an Indonesian startup called Ruang Guru. They are using video and online content, and they're going to use that to spread education and democratize it across Indonesia, which is 270 million people, all in their rural villages. So imagine the kind of opportunity there in which we can develop solutions for such a market. And finally, in terms of security, this is where we learn from Israel a lot, but this is all about just making it much more efficient but safe. So that's the timeline, and essentially these are the 5 things that we are looking at. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but suffice to say, we'd love to work with companies like yourself, researchers, as well as with the Israel Innovation Authority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kai. Really inspiring, and we have a lot to learn from Singapore for sure. And we will continue to cooperate with Singapore. Well, we have published this week that we are funding AI project with more than 300 million shekels every year in the Israel Innovation Authority, but we are funding more or less the same amount as a partner in the Horizon 2020 program. Israel is an associated country to the Horizon 2020, and the Innovation Authority is, of course, hosting ICERD. And we have asked Irina from DG Connect, from the European Commission, to come and explain to us in a few words about the AI strategy in the European Commission and how can Israel be part of it. So, Irina, please, thank you for coming.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks a lot for having me here. So I will be talking about European strategies. We have been doing research in artificial intelligence already since 2004, and indeed Israel has always been part of this as a member of our research programs, but we only started looking at it from the political point of view and from the more overall strategic point of view a very good year ago. And in April 2018, we published a strategy, AI for Europe, and this strategy is based on 3 different pillars, 3 pillars of which we do believe that they always need to go hand in hand. So the first one is to boost the technological and industrial capacity and to very much encourage the uptake of AI. And I'll come to that in a second. The second one is to prepare for the socio-economic changes. So we have 2 main aspects here. The one is the future of work. So what is AI doing to our workplaces, but also in view of the demographic development, where do we need to develop AI? And on the other hand side, what are the skills we are going to need in the future? How are we going to educate ourselves and the younger generations? Is this really, we are all talking about this enormous revolution, but what is the impact it is going to have on our social system, on our education system? And I will not come back to that, so I'll tell you now, we have two very interesting reports since April 2018 on that, and in particular the one which is called the Servos report from May of this year. Servos is the gentleman who drafted the report. It's called Future of Work, Work of the Future. It's very, very interesting reading covering all these aspects. And then the third pillar is the appropriate ethical and legal framework. So perhaps Europeans are more scared of certain things than people in other parts of the world. Perhaps we have just watched too many science fiction movies, read too many science fiction novels, but we can clearly see that there are many people around who don't trust artificial intelligence, who feel that they are getting out of control if we have too much in our systems. And this is why we are saying, okay, we need to make artificial intelligence trustworthy. So we put together a group of independent experts, and they were doing guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence, which were presented in April this year, and which put forward 7 key requirements, which are very similar to all the key requirements you will find in any of the, I think, more than 130 worldwide circulating guidelines right now. So it's about transparency, it's about just safety, robustness, non-discrimination, bias, data governance, data privacy. So all these things, but what is for now relatively unique is that these guidelines also have an assessment list attached, and the assessment list goes to the developers and to the deployers of artificial intelligence to look whether these 7 key requirements in the process of developing and deploying AI were respected. So it is about the data sets which were taken, about bias, and it's all more procedural, mostly more procedural questions. To cut a very long story short, we are currently in the piloting, so we're asking everybody who is working with AI to have a look into this assessment list with 130 questions, which is a bit long, and to fill out a much shorter questionnaire to say whether this is operational or not. This might well be the basis for some legislation we are going to adopt later. So this is why it is really interesting to have feedback from you, to have feedback from people working with AI all over the world and not only Europe. Good. And now I come to the real strategic question. I hope I wasn't too long on the rest. So first, mostly first pillar, but including the other two. To get closer to that, we were putting together a group of member states in the European Commission, and in December last year we published for the first time what we call the Coordinated Plan on Artificial Intelligence. So after half a year of discussions on the challenges, on where we stand, where we want to go, we got out with this plan. It has some 70 measures in very different fields where we believe that this is what we need to do, be it individually as a member state or as the European Commission or as everybody together to get these 3 pillars, to get closer to an implementation of the 3 pillars. We have general points of, let's say, which are more infrastructural. So, for example, we're talking about HPC computing, quantum computing, edge computing. We have a long chapter about the skills needed, but also how to retain talent. What is it, what you need really from the pupils, what you need in universities, what do you need in companies, how can we be an attractive workplace? How can we be an attractive environment for research, for development? So this is something which will be key in the future, and as in everything in this plan, discussions are continuing. So this was like a first element. There will be annual reviews and revisions of the plan, and we continue discussions, we continue working on it. But already at the time, and this is not getting better, we found the skills challenge is probably for our societies one of the most important ones. We have another chapter which is on data. So data, we feel that we have plenty of data around, but it is not available, it is not curated, it is not interoperable, it is sometimes of a very, very bad quality. And talking about ourselves, the public service, it's not that our open data policy is always the very best example. So all this we want to change, so we want to create data spaces also in different sectors, like to look at agricultural data, to look at health data, manufacturing, and to create data spaces where it will be facilitated for companies to share the data, where there will be incentives, contracts, and the infrastructure in place. This is something we are working on to provide that infrastructure. And then, very important indeed, all the research side. And on the research side, as I said before, Israel should happily participate. So we start very much from the beginning with basic research. It goes on with testing, experimentation. Where can we do what testing? Where is it best to test the sectors? For some of them, we are going to need so-called regulatory sandboxes, so a relief or a very broad interpretation of the current rules, because this normally would not be allowed. From the testing, we get to the market, to how to put it forward, in particular to small companies. We have digital innovation hubs, which help with the testing, again, for companies, very concrete, but then also with the integration into the companies. And then we want to have a better financing system, a better ecosystem for companies to adopt AI, to work with AI. So this is that value chain from the basic research into the integration into companies, into the market. We also have chapters on public sector, how we can better lead by example. We have a chapter on ethics and legal, and we have one on international cooperation. And now this is what you saw already. So you can see that we are not the only ones with strategies. All our member states are currently working on their strategies, but it is worldwide. We believe that there can be many, many synergies between the different strategies. For example, when testing things, when doing research together, and that here it is much better to work together on the ethical legal aspects, that we find acceptance everywhere, and to work together on the research side, that we all help pushing artificial intelligence forward. And there's a lot ongoing in international cooperation. So it is OECD where we were working, where you are working. There are all kinds of other international fora currently talking about regulation, but there are also the future research programs we are working on and other programs where we do want to cooperate. And we are happy to have a very close dialogue and to have common objectives and common work. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irina. So I will now ask Bernard Braunschweig. I hope I pronounce his name right, because he corrected me so many times. France was one of the first countries to establish an AI strategy. And we are looking at the numbers and the allocation of resources you were putting, and even by President Macron itself is one of the leaders of this strategy. And we hope to hear from you more. Thank you, Bernard.
Okay, it's a pleasure for me to be here. As you know, we are a member state within the European Union, so we want to be, as France wants to be, at the core of European Union strategy in AI, and we want to even be at the forefront, as Aviv nicely said. We were, in fact, the second one to develop a national strategy, because Finland started earlier, but I think we have a very nice strategy that I want to talk about. We also have good connections with Singapore. I was talking to my friend about the next forum that we will have next month, so between France and Singapore on AI. And I hope that we will have the same with Israel. And I will, of course, invite Israel researchers and businesses to work closely with us. I think there are many opportunities. So what about our strategy? I think I have to do this. Yes. We have a number of assets that we can look at when talking about an AI strategy. We have good research labs. We have a very, very strong education in computer science, applied mathematics, but also knowledge representation, reasoning, logics, statistics. So this is why we have such top-level research labs. And so we are, something like 20% of the European activity in research in AI. We also, of course, have very good companies which are worldwide leaders in many sectors. We were not such a startup country some time ago, and of course, speaking in Israel, which is really a startup country, I think I have to be modest, but we have developed a lot these activities, and now Paris, for example, became a very attractive places for startup. We have hundreds of startups booming and a lot of capital raising in our country. And also, that's very important, we have quality databases. So Irina was talking about the lack of databases of good quality. In fact, we do have some of them, especially for health, for example. We have 65 million people in the social security database. If we build upon that, we will have a lot of these excellent assets for developing AI in health. So the 4 key elements, we have more than these 4 key elements, but these are really the things that I want you to look at. We have launched world-class interdisciplinary research institutes. In fact, 4 of them. This is a 300 million euros program altogether for 4 years. And so they have these institutes, which build upon existing forces, of course, will gather something like 200 research, we call them research chairs or research fellowships, which are leading scientists and professors with a team around them. And so we will have, we have already labeled something like 130 such teams, and 40 others will come by the end of the year. And so these interdisciplinary research institutes are also very much linked with industry, because the program demands that 1/3 of their funding comes from industry. So altogether, I think we have something like 200 companies collaborating with these research institutes. As I said, as we already said, the data is really important, and namely, we are building the Health Data Hub. That's an 80 million euros program, building, as I said, on top on the social security databases, which is technical administrative data, but also linking to hospitals and clinics in many domains, so that we will have a lot of bio and health data in order to develop applications. We have identified a number of challenges which are links between research and industry. At the moment, 3 of them already were launched. Each challenge is a program of 30 million euro, and it demands participation of industry and research in some places. And so the three ones that we already started are improvement of medical diagnosis with AI, reliability and certification of AI technology, and cybersecurity, including AI. And the last measure that I want you to remember is this creation of the GPI, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, which, as Irina mentioned, has been promoted by the G7, especially at the last G7 meeting in Biarritz, but was also announced by our President Emmanuel Macron in the Global Forum on Artificial Intelligence for Humanity, which took place in Paris 3 weeks ago. And so this is based on the International Panel for Climate Change, IDs. So we are going to launch this expert group of, well, let's say 100, 150 experts worldwide in collaboration with our partners, especially from Canada, but also from other countries, the G7 countries and all countries that want to be involved. And of course, I invite Israel to join this GPI activity, because we are hoping to set it up as a world discussion forum on AI and implications for society. So altogether, our program is 1.5 billion euros of funding over these 4 years, half of it for research, well, a little less than half of it for research, and we've identified priority application areas, which are health, mobility, environment, including agriculture, and defense and security. And I think we also share these application areas with other countries, including Israel. And also, in this program, we have a strong support for transformation of our administration. So we are launching a number of internal projects within the French administration to develop AI technology for the benefits of citizens. So the big two big chunks, which are talent, research, and education. That's one big chunk, the other big chunk being dissemination in economy and administration. But we are also placing, like the European Union does, ethics at the forefront of our strategy, meaning the GPI, but also internal measures for ethics in our country. And as I said, and I really want to confirm that, we are completely in line with the European strategy in all these aspects. I don't need to explain this too much because Irina did it very well. So just to mention that we are a good member state and that we contribute to the benefit of the European Union with our strategy. And I think we will discuss this further later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry. Hear me? Okay, now it's working. So thank you very much, Bertrand. And it seems like we are all looking at the same challenges, and we are all want to have better skills with the workforce. We all want to get some data access. We are all facing problems with standards and ethics, and but regarding the technology itself, do you think that we are really needed? The governments are really needed. It seems like it's all happening, and so many companies there, so much money is there, and still we are putting quite a lot of money on encouraging the AI technology. Should we limit ourselves only to regulations and helping, or do you think that we are really needed in the research itself? I'm offering the option to answer to each one of you. So it seems.
This one. I think that, yes, a lot is happening without the government, it's true, and especially in business. Many big companies, obviously, are very active, and we know that the big players are really pushing AI a lot. I don't think that the government participation would be only for regulations. In our country, we really want to trigger, to support the technology transfer from academia to industry. In fact, this was already discussed some time ago, even before the current French strategy. We were, 1 year before, we were looking at what we should do in something that we called at that time France AI. And I was in charge of the group defining the technology transfer support that we should do. And there's a lot to be done because as I said, in our country, some excellent research is done within the academia, and also we have some very good startups, but the link still needs to be developed, and this has to be supported by the government in some way. And so we are pushing measures, we are supporting new projects, collaborative projects between research and industry. We are encouraging joint labs between research and industry, and we are helping them to do that by funding some part of these joint labs. And there are other measures where we think the government can be useful, and that we just cannot only count on industry to develop our technologies.
So let me share our thinking behind. I think in many cases, there is no need for government. Government should just stand out of the way and just set the rules, B2C, and particularly in the B2C industries. Take, for example, ride-hailing. I think the danger with ride-hailing is that government stands in and blocks progress and innovation. So that's where government has got to be very careful, step back, think about how to set the rules such that it protects consumers, but let innovation flourish. But I think I think there's a lot of role that government can do, even in spurring innovation and spurring AI adoption. Take, for example, the the CEO of Mobileye, he talked about autonomous driving. And there is a thinking in the autonomous driving world, especially in the Valley, and maybe with Mobileye, that, let's not care about government. We just design the system, and it will achieve level 5 autonomous driving level, and that's it, right? It will just operate like a human driver. That may be so, but I think the timeline for that will be much further away than if autonomous vehicles works with governments to think about how do you take in data that the government already collects. How do you work with the government in terms of designing rules or designing interventions? Because sometimes you have to take baby steps in order to get to the level 5, right? It could be a simple thing as first starting with designated lanes. It could be simple things in terms of just tapping into the traffic light infrastructure. Those are things that government can actually work with companies to find solutions. And then related to that, I think apart from capital, which companies would have, companies are also looking for their first revenue and first business case. And in many of these, really the game-changing applications, you need government involved, right? Take, for example, healthcare. There's a reason why the US still continues to spend 20% of their GDP on healthcare. Simply because, I guess, it is a very difficult market to work with. There are lots of regulations. There are lots of different data restrictions. They are very entrenched players. But those are the big opportunities that are possible to disrupt. And 20% of GDP is a lot of money of the US market. And so that's where governments can come in, because governments own a lot of data. Some governments in the world still have a lot of trust with citizens. And so in that sense, they can take a little bit more risk than businesses can. And so the challenge is to find that partnership between government, people, and startups. And that's the approach we've been taking for healthcare.
Thank you. Well, Irina, you are very focused in the European Commission on social challenges. So probably you think that there is a lot of market failures there, and the government should be part of it in using AI technology.
Are we? Well, we are very much into social challenges, and I think, and this is where I believe that the state is indeed needed. AI is a big opportunity, and we should make sure that nobody is left behind. So that would include, again, what I was saying before, the skills for everybody. It includes data. We know that for smaller companies it is very, very difficult to get good data to develop things. So for us, the role of the public sector would be to create the right framework and to put the incentives forward for cooperation. So to get the data, to do the research together, that also the small ones and the universities and the big ones can benefit from each other, and again, that nobody is left behind.
Maybe, if you allow me, in addition to that, we all know now, it was not the case a few years ago, but we all know that trust is the key to the adoption of AI in our society. And we need to develop several measures, technology, regulations, incentives in order to build trust in AI systems, which are mandatory for critical applications, life-critical or mission-critical applications. And so this implies, this has been discussed already, this implies transparency, this implies verification, validation, proof, certification. And of course, the big companies, the big industries are also looking into this and are able to develop some technologies, but this requires long-term research in many cases. And so this long-term research can only be supported by research funding, which is state funding. And so, and as I said, in collaboration with these companies, we have, in France, we have several companies which are very much involved and looking into this question of trustworthy AI. But I really believe that the government action can also, for the long-term part of this, for the certification aspect, for the normalization aspect, for a lot of theoretical aspects relative to proof, verification, etc., will need government support in the long range.
Thank you. Well, there is quite a few comparison of the AI to the internet revolution, saying that, well, the internet came and it started as a government initiative in this way or another, and eventually it was developed by its own without any government involvement. And now it's part of this revolution. The AI is not a new technology. It was there for many years, and still it didn't break through. It seems like for many years it was there, left, and we didn't see any reason to join the forces and put money on it. And now it seems like it's the opportunity, and we are all very eager to do so. So what's really different? Why do you think the AI, what was the reason for the AI to become so important in the last few years?
Well, personal point of view, I studied signal processing in the university, and I did Monte Carlo systems. But one of the challenges, and my master's thesis was on, back then there was, these are the precursor of the neural networks, right? Monte Carlo Markov chains. And so my thesis was in sequential Monte Carlo, which is about trying to reduce the processing load to execute prediction. And one of the challenges back then was processing power. And so I remember I used to put my algorithms in the server, because you only have the power of the server. And then I'll run it, I'll leave, and hopefully over the weekend it processes. I come back and I hope, oh, no bugs, and then there will be the result. And then that carried on. So it took me 2-3 months to actually accumulate results. And occasionally you will set yourself back by a week simply because you can only use this sort of background processing power when no one is looking. And so I can only sneak into the lab on weekends to do that. And right now, I think that has completely changed. The thesis is no longer useful because the amount of processing power has gone in quantum leaps. The amount of sensors and the amount of data that we collect has also increased. But I think the challenges still remain. And in particular, I think the challenges got to come with a couple of areas. One, I think just in terms of just collecting data and making sure that the data is clean and the data is properly sorted out. I think that's something that we need to figure out. Second bit is in terms of, I would say, finding the right application for it. It's very easy to say AI this, AI that, but the truth is, it is not so easy. I mean, for the consumer, there are already some initial applications, but take, for example, we all talk about AI for Internet of Things, right? We talk about AI in terms of manufacturing and factory. But that requires a completely different view of it, because if you look at it, humans are very different from machines. Machines in the factory are very predictable. And so do you really, really need AI if something goes wonky? Not really, right? So you need to find a different way in terms of interpreting the data in order to actually extract value out of the sensors. So those are the so-called, so while the technology is there, we are finding the applications, and it requires actually in-depth cooperation between different parties to make that happen.
Maybe some of my personal history too. Yeah, I started AI during the second AI winter in the 80s. Huh? Yes. And by the way, for example, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of our conference in France, which is called Pattern Recognition and Artificial Intelligence. So yes, it's a long story. It's a long story. You all know that it dates back from the 40s and 50s. But and the algorithms that we are using now were developed in the 80s. Convolutional networks were developed in the 80s, early 90s. And as you said, computing infrastructure and the access to data has been really a big change maker, a big game changer. And I remember in year 2000, I was attending the European AI conference in Berlin. And at that time, I was president of the French AI Society. And then after the conference, I wrote a small report to my colleagues of the society and saying, I've seen something, the web will change everything for AI, because this is a very important application areas with lots of available data, with lots of available resources, with huge economic and social challenges. And so this will really be a game changer for AI. I wrote that in, something like 19 years ago. And if you look at who are the big players in AI in the world, these are really the web operators, the GAFAM and BATX in China. So this has been the advent of the web, the advent of the availability of online data, plus the huge resource computational resource infrastructure that we have, plus the fact that we have good algorithms which have been improved, has really been a trigger for AI. And this is why AI is now becoming, let's say, for us in RIA, something like 1/4 or 1/5 or 1/4 or 1/3 of activity, which was not the case, I would say, 10 years ago.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to be too provocative, but you've all heard probably what Elizabeth Warren, one of the Democratic candidates, has said in the last 2 weeks about the fact that maybe we should transform Google as a utility and to make sure that the innovation is still there and the competition is still there. And I looked at the list of the tools that Ben was presenting before. And are we going into a consolidation? We look at, for instance, at the communication area, and we see a consolidation there for 3-4 different players, only 3-4 different players. And are we going there as well with the AI, or we have here a real opportunity to work with the small players? Irina.
I believe we have plenty of opportunities. So with the Googles of this world, this is very much the business to consumer market. And it's true that there we are very much behind. But for example, if we look at certain industry sectors, also the industrial data we are having, which goes hand in hand, if we are looking in our experience and your experience in robotics, there are plenty of application fields for AI where we are very much front runners and where we can build on this position. This perhaps also answers the question why we need to create incentives, just to make sure that we really run in front and do things well.
Okay, thank you. Bernard, you want? Okay. You talked before, Bernard, about the problem with the tax transfer, and we see it also here in Israel. I will give the opportunity for a question in a second. Just, I have to say that it seems like when we are looking at the data in Israel, out of hundreds of startups, we have only like 32 startups which are based on tech transfer from the university, and we see it as a market failure because there is a lot of knowledge in the universities, and for sure we have to join forces on this. So I think there was a question. Can we take a question or two? We have 5 more minutes. Yes, please. Yes. Well, you are approaching the question to someone specifically? All of us.
Basically, the questions on surveillance capitalism. So the idea that you are using, whether it's sensors, cameras, and all that, right? And what's been our government's approach towards that? I think we are still sorting it out, at least from the Singapore end. I mean, if you take one extreme, one would say, some of the countries like China and all that take a different philosophy. It's a function of what society can accept and what society expects of government. I think for us, we are also in Singapore society is slightly different. I think, so we've been doing surveys about this. the majority of Singaporeans actually prefer that they trust the government to hold more of their data than companies to some extent, even though I would say that in the last year or two, some of the government healthcare systems, for example, were hacked and data was exfiltrated. But there is a general support. So on that basis, they would much prefer that government actually be that arbiter of that. Now, how does that poses actually some challenges for us too. The question for us is, do we really want to collect everything and become Big Brother? I don't think we want to do that. We are very conscious of that. But at the same time, we recognize that there's only certain kinds of data that citizens would allow government to hold and no one else. So that's the balance we have to strike. We are putting out today, for example, citizens actually ask, they like the fact that they have, in our public housing, for example, we have actually cameras at corridors. And actually, this is something that they ask for, because they find that with those cameras on the corridors, it has actually significantly lowered and deterred house break-ins and loan sharking, that sort of thing. But perhaps, so this is something that we have to work out simply because, perhaps that's okay for some environments, but it's not okay for other environments. We're not sure. But this is the kind of conversation that I think is very important for governments to have with society. And I imagine that for every society, the conversation and where you draw the line is going to be very different. That's as much as I can say.
So this is why we are currently talking regulation for European Union. We need to balance all the benefits we can have against indeed a tradition of human rights or fundamental rights we are having. And it is clear that some of the possible applications of AI violate our fundamental rights. So this is what we're discussing now. We already have the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the question is what else we need. And when you talk, for example, facial recognition, these are technologies indeed where GDPR only applies to a certain limit. There are other technologies with the same, but that's the process right now.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but we are run out of time, and we are not able to take any more questions. But we are still here, so we can ask us just after this session. I really thank you all for coming, making a very long trip to Israel to share your experience, and I think we've learned a lot, and we hope to see you more in Israel. Thank you very much, everyone.